The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call. Hope everybody got home from all their meetings last week safely, and a lot has happened since then, so we all had to hit the ground running. And we'll try to touch base on parts of it and parts of the meeting as well that are action items, so that we're all kind of on the same playing field. And some of these things we'll work on over the next few leaders calls, so we'll have a chance to dig deeper into some of these issues. Glad you're all here. We're going to do kind of a 90-yard dash through the federal funding on housing counseling, where we're at, the latest developments on HAWC. Hopefully have a little conversation around the NOFA, which just came out. I'm sure you all are well aware. The HUD Housing Counseling NOFA. We'll do a run through on some of the highlights from the Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting, and we'll have some great photographs too. I'll figure out how to post them on the on our list on our website. And then we've got some actually very good webinars coming up, some of which speak directly to what people are asking for around social media. So we'll talk about that, and then close it out with a quick review of all the groups that joined. We had a rush of memberships last month. We really appreciate that a lot. But let's dive into the basics here. So the President revealed his budget. So what's the good word, Matthew?
Yeah, so President Obama released his budget proposal for the fiscal year 2015, which begins October 1st of this year. Released that on Tuesday. So I think folks are pretty familiar with the budget process, but just to kind of give a little context, this is really the first step, is the President releasing his proposal to Congress. It really lays out the President's priorities, and it really helps guide the negotiations that will happen between the House and the Senate. A lot of the time, really on a lot of items, the Senate Democrats will use the President's budget as their blueprint, and we'll go with his funding numbers. So it kind of sets the bar for federal funding. So the big question, obviously, is how did housing counseling fare in President Obama's proposal? And the answer is really it's a mixed bag, which it seems like a lot of things have been for us recently. But I'm a bad news first kind of guy. So the bad news is there's a slight net loss for housing counseling of about $2.5 million between the HUD Housing Counseling Program and NFMC, those two combined. Small net loss, but as everyone on the call knows, it's a loss on top of other cuts that we've seen in recent years. So while $2.5 million itself is not a huge number in the scheme of things, we do have to keep in mind that this is coming down from tens of millions more in just a few years ago. So that does concern us. The good news, though, that we see is, and we've talked kind of forecasted this a little bit on the last call, but is a shifting of funds from NFMC to HUD Housing Counseling. This is a good thing for a couple of reasons. First, we know that NFMC is eventually going to go away, so our goal in the coming years, as NFMC is being kind of drawn down, is to make sure that those funds are captured by the HUD Housing Counseling Program. And that's really our goal. And then very practically, as you all know, HUD Housing Counseling funding is a more flexible pot of money. Agencies have a lot more discretion in how it gets used, so it's just operationally a positive thing to have those dollars shifted to HUD Housing Counseling. So now, as far as next steps, NHRC in the coming weeks is going to submit sign-on letters to members of Congress, asking them to fund housing counseling. We're going to ask them to be around the levels in the President's proposal. I'm not sure. We're going to have a conversation with other advocates over the coming days to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the dollar amounts that we're asking for. On the one hand, you don't really want to endorse a $2.5 million cut that we see in the President's budget, but it's also pretty unlikely that even the Senate Democrats will go much higher than the President's proposal, or maybe even any higher than the President's proposal. So we'll have that conversation, but I expect that we'll be right around the levels that the President proposed, which I actually have kind of glossed over, but they're on the screen. So it's $60 million for HUD Housing Counseling, which is up $15 million from the $45 million for this year, and $50 million for NFMC, which is down from $67.5 million for this year. So our plan is to submit sign-on letters, to have them tailored to individual states and as best as possible to individual congressional districts. So we met, Bruce and I and some other folks were in D.C. A couple weeks ago. We met with a bunch of people, both sides of the aisle in House and Senate. We met with Senator Feinstein's housing staffer, Senator Feinstein's on appropriations. She asked us to submit a letter to them with some California-specific numbers. We met with Senator Pryor from Arkansas, Senator Jack Reed's staffer from Rhode Island. First thing they did, we handed them a sign-on letter and looked to see if Arkansas and Rhode Island were represented on there. So it's really critical that we get sign-on letters to these folks and that we make them as tailored as possible to the state. So an example of how we do this would be, so Senators Durbin and Kirk are on the both from Illinois and are both on the Appropriations Committee. So we would say, for example, in a letter asking for federal funding, that more than 9% of Illinois mortgages are either in foreclosure or seriously delinquent. That's the kind of thing that they need to hear, that brings it home to them, makes them realize that this is an urgent thing in their home state that they need to get behind funding. But so we really need your help to be able to do this effectively. So we have some action steps that we're going to ask, that I'm now asking all of you to help us out with. So the first thing is to help collecting data like the statistic that I just mentioned that we can use in our sign-on letters. Really important thing is that we need to go beyond just foreclosure. So that data I just cited is a foreclosure stat, obviously. We really want to make sure that we do need to make the case that the foreclosure crisis is still happening and that it's not over, but we also need to broaden the conversation, make sure that we're not just talking about foreclosure, that we're also talking about all the various services and the many reasons why housing counseling is so important and why federal funding why there should be adequate federal funding to support housing counseling. So that's step one, is going to be collecting data, putting together these letters. We'll be doing that in the next couple weeks. Step two is going to be having folks sign on to the letters. It's really critical, like I said, when we send these letters to Senator Feinstein, to send all the folks on the Appropriations Committee and people in Congress generally, that they flip to their home state or their district and see as many groups as possible are signed on. So it's really critical that once we have these letters ready to go in a couple of weeks, that we get everyone on the call signed on. The last thing is that we're asking folks to do is to become what we're calling a state advocacy leader. So we rolled this out at the meeting in Los Angeles last week. But the idea is basically that we're looking for at least a few people from each state to help us with our kind of advocacy efforts at the state level. So for example, for our federal funding campaign, that what we're talking about now, we would ask the state advocacy leaders to help with outreach to your networks, asking your colleagues to help us with gathering data, asking folks to sign on in your network. We realize that everyone on the call is extremely busy, and we'll be very careful not to make this a huge burden on you in terms of time. Really, we'll just be asking if you could spend 30 minutes or an hour here and there, just sending some emails and really helping us with our efforts at your state level. I'm going to flip now. So these are actually, we had a good turnout when we recruited folks at the national meeting, but we do still have a lot of states that we don't have an advocacy leader for. But we were happy to have multiple people for any state. So we especially need people from these states, but if you're in a state that's not on this list and are interested, we would still love to have you sign up. And you can just do that by sending me an email, and I'll be in touch. And I just realized that it's Montana and not Montant. But so that's all we've got for the federal funding update. Our next steps. So yeah, this is going to be a huge effort in the next few weeks and really months. It's going to go on for, and we really appreciate your help and need your help. So please be in touch with me as we go forward.
That's the way it works. It's still, politics is local, and you're participating with your local congressional and Senate people are what will drive them and help all of us to preserve and hopefully expand funding. So very, very helpful. And more to come on this in the future. Also in the budget was HAWK, which is the Homeowners Armed with Knowledge. So this is this initiative that FHA has been pushing, which we're very pleased with, and we have participated in many levels. A number of you have been in meetings where this has all been discussed and vetted in different ways. It came up again in Los Angeles. And the idea behind HAWK is that it's that there will be incentives to encourage people who are potential home buyers to go to counseling. We think that there'll also be some ability to build in funding for housing counseling agencies to provide that counseling. There may be also programs to create incentives for people to go to counseling if they have delinquencies. And the way we think it's shaping up, though it's not actually very spelled out in the President's budget. It's described just as it is on the screen here. But what we think will be discounts on the mortgage insurance, the MIP for FHA up front to get people to go to counseling. Sarah actually in the meeting talked about there'd be 3 points to encourage counseling. One was up front before people have signed their agreement of sale or mortgage application. A second stop at the point where they are between mortgage application and closing, because they found that the knowledge drop-off for people is pretty high, and that there are lots of relevant things people need to think about, including budgeting and preparing for home ownership, that ought to be introduced or reinforced at that point. And then the third part is after closing, and they're expecting to build in discount on the monthly MIP payments to encourage people to, well, only for people who actually go to counseling, to get post-purchase counseling. So lots of ideas floating around that. We'll continue in this conversation, and as it evolves, and hopefully we'll have more input into it as well. But this has the potential, I think, as Sarah has said, the potential to become a model not just for FHA lending, but for other lenders as well. And it does what we really would like to see, which is build in counseling into the process. So some very positive news and all of that. The other thing that, do we have a slide on the NOFA? Okay, well, so let's. So the next topic on our conversation is the Housing Counseling NOFA, and doesn't look like we have a slide on it, but this is all breaking, as we all know. The NOFA just came out, and we were hoping that Teresa Bardwell would join us, and so Matthew's trying to figure out if we can click her in. But the NOFA, as it's coming out, has a bunch of changes. Teresa, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect.
Okay, so Teresa Bardwell with RCAC and has been involved in many of our meetings and is often very deeply involved as a person who understands the mechanics of much of the work that we do and works with many agencies. So Teresa, what do you see on the NOFA? Are there big changes, small changes? What's the story?
I would say largely small changes, and I have to preface this by saying I have read it not in total detail, and I haven't had a chance to compare it to last year's yet. But with that in mind, some of the basic changes that we see is it is going to be a 2-year award. The funding for the second year will be based on approval by Congress, but that certainly would be a nice change to not have to do an application next year. I think the funding you've already gone through, there was something mentioned in the available funds that is consistent with last year, in that $2 million is of the 45 is set aside for training grants, and typically there's a national a grant that's put out, another NOFA, that's for people who do national training, and I suspect that one might be for setting up to get the certification done. I wanted to mention one other thing. I'll try and give you page numbers here if I can. It mentioned in here where training is on page 11. It does break out the eligible expenses include training, testing, and certification for housing, not limited to preparation of counselors to satisfy HUD housing counseling, training, testing, and certification. So it looks to me like probably the comprehensive funds is what you'll be using for the certification. It did increase the number of FTEs for housing counselors. So one of the things that they're going to look at, one of the factors is how many FTEs you have. That's one of the baselines.
FTEs are?
Full-time equivalents, excuse me. So you might have 2 half-time counselors would equal 1 full-time equivalent. So that's something that they're going to look at this year.
And put in the scoring.
And put in the scoring. That's right.
I think what this means is that, so they framed it in as part of the training and certification requirements, and that the training and certification is a billable expense, and that they will put in as part of the formula the number of housing counselors you have on staff.
Correct. And it is broken out under the, when they get into the detail on the rating factors. Another thing on page 21 is part of the rating factor 2 on need is rural communities and geographically isolated counseling agencies. There's a bigger focus this year on rural and those who may not have access to internet. And we saw that both on the 9902 form, the changes in that, and also it's drawn out separately here. On pages 22 and 23, they go into some areas on different points. Affirmatively furthering fair housing. They're looking at staff training of fair housing and civil rights, and then mobility counseling. So you may want to read through those sections, see if those can get you some points as you're applying. And then on page 23, it gets into energy efficiency and health and safety. So green building, renewable energy, different types of things there. And I think some of that was in last year's, but I don't remember if all of it was. I might also add that in the general NOFA, there was a section on fair housing, so that continues to be a big thing for HUD. And I think I've got one more thing here. We always have to look to the NOFA to see what you can use for leverage, and HUD's mentioned right in the NOFA that, you can't have 100% funding for your grantees, that they're only providing part of their budget. But they also outline here that you're not allowed to use any kind of federal funds as match. So if you get, home, CDBG, any of the other HUD programs, you cannot use those. But they did state in there that you can use fee income. So if you're charging fees, then that's something that you might want to check that section because it can be used as leverage. So those are kind of the main things that, there are several new intermediaries. And the way it was worded in this NOFA is that the plan is probably, if you were to become a direct HUD-approved agency after this NOFA was released, probably you would be asked to join one of the existing intermediaries or SFAs for funding. There's a possibility they might come out later in 2015 with a separate NOFA for new locals, but that's not necessarily going to happen. So agencies that are approved after yesterday would need to check and see, do they have to go with an intermediary or housing finance agency, or are they allowed to, is there going to be a separate NOFA for them? And they're still looking at bonuses for funding for going with one of the intermediaries. They're really trying to push the locals that direction.
And do they define at all what the bonus is?
No.
Right.
Just a bonus.
Scoring's still kind of a mystery.
It's still kind of a mystery. There's no dollar amount and no point amount attached to it, but it does list in there. It describes there will be a bonus for that.
So one of the things that Sarah and others at HUD have said is that they have redefined or broadened the definition of what an intermediary can be capture smaller geographies where there are multiple agencies working together. And so, for example, there have been some statewide intermediaries now. So there's Garden State, which is in New Jersey. There's the Minnesota Home Ownership Center, which happens to be in Minnesota. And then there's more localized ones as well. New York Mortgage Coalition is another one that has a state identification. So I think that they don't have to stay within that state. I think it's more that it's that HUD is opening the door to different kinds of intermediaries. They don't have to be multi-state, but they could certainly expand if they wanted to. The other interesting thing is that there's a San Diego, this Housing Opportunities Collaborative, which has been a source of a lot of creative stuff in the industry, and they're really a cluster of agencies that aren't statewide. They're more Metro and Southern California focused. And I think Hope Enterprise has been an intermediary for a while. And then the United Way of Central Alabama is the other one that I saw. There's also Mississippi Homeowner Education Center, but I'm pretty sure they have been around for a while as well. So the Alabama one, United Way, is new, and so that's interesting as well. So there's a total of 32 intermediaries now, up from 37, from 27.
And one thing I should mention is that it remains the same on HECM reverse mortgage funding, that you can apply to an intermediary for your comprehensive. You can still apply separately for just the reverse mortgage funding.
Right, right. So there's also this thing about 18 months. Your contract goes for 18 months. Can you explain that?
What they're doing is the contract date will be October 1st, 2013 through March 31st, 2014. Let me look at the dates in here again. Hold on.
15.
15. And in essence, what they're doing is, because it's so late coming out now, they're going to go ahead and go into March next year to give you that additional time to spend out the money. And then the dates for the next one would be 10/1/14 through 9/30/15, assuming that you hadn't used that extension that's already built in. So if you spent out your funds by the end of September, then you would just start with the regular cycle. But it does allow for that 18 months. It does again say that you can request extensions beyond that, but that's up to HUD at that point whether they want to approve or not. And it does have to be by special request.
Great. Thank you very much. That was really excellent. We don't have any questions in the queue, do we? Nope. Okay, good. So any other last thoughts on this, Teresa?
I think happy application, everybody.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. All good. Well, thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
All right. So we just wanted to do a quick run through on some of the highlights from the Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting. And, you know, in the morning we did do a major run through on what the accomplishments were. We're not going to do that on this call, though you could always pull up these slides and take a look. But we did have some victories in funding. We did make some serious progress with servicers, and I think our work in services will inform what we do this upcoming year to try to get better resolutions for people and escalations. We've done a lot of work to build we call building the NHRC infrastructure, so that means, you know, making these calls work. We've got, we're regularly getting 80, 90 people, sometimes 120, 150 people onto these calls, and we started with much smaller numbers, 42. It looks like it on this list right here. The Leaders in Housing Counseling list is we started last year with 118. We now have we're actually over 750, I think. But so we've made some real progress on building that, and we do want to keep building too. So, you know, I think it's in all of our interests if you talk with other managers, and we're not really trying to get housing counselors in, we're really trying to get people with some seniority and management, and the idea is that you then share this information with your staffs and your peers, but the idea is that it's a way for us to very quickly have high-level conversations about the industry, help make decisions when we need it, mobilize when we need to. And the list has been really a really valuable tool in this, and appreciate all your participation there. Our goal is to try to break 1,000 by the end of the year. It's actually going to be a lot harder than it was to get to 743 or 750, I think we are now, but a lot harder because, in many ways, people we're talking to now, you are the people who know and are the most motivated, the most advocacy-oriented, and to get to the next level, you really need to reach people who are not thinking so much around advocacy and collective action. And so anything you can do to bring more people into the fold and get people to be using the list, that really will help us build a lot. We've had a good rush of NHRC members coming in this month, and over the course of the year, that's all been good. And actually, I'm going to pause here and talk for a moment about credit reports. And this is sort of an important alert. It's we're just kind of figuring this out, but you know, we've had a discount of $9.75 for credit reports for members. And we've had a number of agencies jump on, but not as big as we had expected. The providers coming back and saying they want to raise the rates because we haven't gotten quite the volumes that we expected. And I'm just speaking frankly with you all. If you want to get the $9.75 rate, you should, and you're a member of NHRC, you should get that application in right now, because they've proposed $12.25 per tri-merge credit report, all soft pulls and credit scores. We're going to push back and say that we're going to make an intensified effort to get more groups in and get more volume going. But if you want to capture this $9.75, you need to get your application in right now. We just heard this week that they're still honoring the $9.75. So if you're at all interested, make it happen right now. It would really help a lot in terms of building up the volumes. It could be a very good savings for people, but it's also critical that we if you want to get the discount, you should get your application in right now. We did do some talking about what other discounts people were interested in, and you know, I'd love to hear more ideas of things that, you know, across the board the industry uses that we might be able to use our collective buying power more effectively. So throw those ideas our way, and very interested in following up on it. So let's see.
Sorry to respond to a couple of questions.
Yeah,
so
sure.
The rate that we currently have is $9.75 for a tri-merge report. And
it is, but we don't know how. Well, it's a year-long contract, so if you go in now, they're still honoring the $9.75, but they've indicated they want to raise it.
And it's available through CIS as the provider.
Right. Yes, CIS is the provider. And I mean, it's for members of National Housing Resource Center. It's a special contract. Was there another question?
No, that's all.
Okay, good. Okay. So we did talk, we did spend a lot of time on the lobbying and policy work we've done in the past year, which has been very high impact. We're, I think, really recognized as both a go-to place and have been able to influence everything from the design of the mortgage applications to getting housing counseling included in discussions in terms of policy. We've clearly had some impact with the state, with the Senate Banking Committee, and we hope that some of our work will show up in proposals they do if there's GSE reform coming up in the future. There's a lot of discussions that will happen in the upcoming year, and a lot of work we all have to do to more effectively integrate us. You know, I think they're just big opportunities, and are being mobilized and being able to very quickly put out strategic surveys, analyses, comments, all have really fed into building our relationship. And it's interesting now. So the White House is recognizing our work, and we are in touch with them. We are dealing with the Fed, the OCC, CFPB. We, of course, deal regularly with HUD. We'll do a lot of work on the in the future on settlements. So I mean, this all is kind of working, and your participation has made a huge difference in all this. And finally, the last piece of this is that we've been providing services for the housing counseling community. Hope to do more of this, but trainings that have involved, well, we had 1,000 counselors on the AG settlement training. We have one we're doing with NCLR jointly that we've already trained 500 people on the new CFPB servicing standards. There'll be another training coming up shortly we'll talk about soon on the call today. We've hosted a bunch of educational webinars. Excuse me. We've hosted a bunch of educational webinars. There are more coming in the future. We're very interested. If there are topics you're particularly interested in, you should definitely shoot them our way. But it's been a great year, and we really appreciate all the participation, which comes to the point where we do want to do a quick shout out to the top participators. And at the meeting, in the leaders meeting last week in the morning, we got to shout out to all the groups that were actually in the room, but we'll give the entire list of top participators in the in our work, and these are the groups that are doing an outstanding job on participation in the surveys, which have become, critical policy issues.
I'm just going to jump in real quick. There were a few people that were asking about the OCC settlement on the last slide. If you could just give a quick elaboration on that.
Okay. There's actually a couple different settlements. We're talking about the IFR settlement, or we're talking about the you know what? Let's sort that out. Let me do the participation. Let's figure out let's drill down on what the specific question really is. Where we have a little more. When I have a little more information. Okay. So who's doing a great job out there? We really appreciate this. So on the groups that participated the most on the surveys, so it's ESOP, it's Cambridge Credit Counseling, Beyond Housing, Albany County Rural Housing, Dalton Whitfield CDC, Home Free USA, Community Action Human Resources, Green Forest CDC, Housing and Education Alliance, National Asian American Coalition, Northern Homes CDC, and the Spanish Coalition for Housing. So nice geography all around the country, some national groups, some very, very local groups. Really big shout out and thanks to what you're doing. And on the groups that participate, so that was on surveys. The next phase is on sign-on letters. So getting in and getting all these letters signed on, which, as Matthew referenced, when we go to D.C. and we're meeting with Senator Pryor's office, he looks at our letter and looks at what our demand and what the issue is, and then opens it up. And are there Arkansas groups signed on? And yes, there were. So we were in good shape on that. And when we met with Jack Reed's office, he said, well, there better be a Rhode Island map groups on there. And yes, Rhode Island was well represented, so we cleared that hurdle. So who are the champions here? So it's Campesinos Sin Fronteras. It's Family Housing Resources, Korean Resource Center, the Inland Fair Housing and Mediation Board, REACH, Hagerstown Home Store, National Urban League, CCCS of Buffalo, and the Westchester Residential Opportunities. And for the third word, announcement of the top, the winners are, so these groups scored on both the survey and the sign-on. So CEI out of Maine, HOPE out of Maryland, and Neighborhood Nonprofit Housing Corporation. All three of them, big thanks out to you for really stepping up and participating in all the things you possibly can. Very good and very helpful there. So did we figure out this OCC thing a little bit better?
I believe they're talking about the IFR settlement, but I'm not positive.
Okay, so on the IFR settlement, the latest that this painful process has been is that the OCC and the Fed, this is actually joint with them, is they're still distributing some checks. They've gotten a much higher take-up rate than they had expected, so they're somewhere in the 80-85% range, which is certainly way, way better than it was. And they're expecting that there'll be a pot of maybe, and this is just people estimating, and of $300 or $400 million remaining on the of unspent money, and it'll be this summer when it becomes available, probably mid to end of summer. You may remember that we put out a proposal around financial capability in the fall, where a dozen groups all signed on to an effort to work with the Fed and the OCC. Part of the trick was not to replicate something that looked like HUD funding, so that Congress would look at the funding and say, oh, you're already getting this money from the OCC, you don't need us to allocate for HUD. So it was to be something that looked distinctively different than what was being done, but also that the money would actually flow directly to counseling agencies. And and there's a lot of groups that are asking for this money. You should be aware. So the financial capability idea, which is done initially as a joint project from HPF and NFCC, the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, and National Housing Resource Center, was an idea that that the counseling agencies would get a grant to specifically work with individual families around helping them rebuild their credit, their budget, their finances, and get back on their feet after being impacted by the recession. But it was meant to be kind of a one-time influx of funds to really build capacity in that area. So that idea is still in the hopper, and other groups have submitted proposals as well. There is some talk about maybe there is some initiative that should be done. Maybe it should be broader. I've encouraged, and so we're thinking about what the next step might be, to try to think about something that might include financial capability, the costs of training and technology, training and testing for the upcoming world of HUD, and so you don't have to use your HUD contract for that. Maybe there's upgrades in technology. There's a lot of ways to think about this, and so we're trying to read the tea leaves and talk with the OCC and the Fed about what their interests might be, and we may shape a little bit broader proposal. Our interest, from my perspective, is to really try to figure out how to get this money directly to counseling agencies with as few strings attached and have as little kind of requirements that become a burden for agencies, and provide some flexibility. But it's not up to us to decide, and we'll continue making proposals. So if you've got some thoughts, please feel free to shoot them our way. This will be one of the many projects we have this spring. Okay, let's see. There was a very good discussion at the leaders meeting about integrating housing counseling into mortgage origination and servicing. So we touched on this redesign of the mortgage applications, which we've talked about at some length already. And one issue that kind of surfaced from that is that all this information that goes into the Uniform Mortgage Data Program, this will be there'll be a large pool of information, including which agencies did the counseling and what kind of counseling, what mode of counseling was being done. And one of the issues there was that the question is who actually has access to the data, how can the data become maybe addressing all the privacy issues. Is there a way that agencies can get access to that data so that they can use it for their own management purposes? And we'll need to explore that. I have no idea the answer to that. The other thing that came up, which caught me off guard, was that we had spent a lot of energy on trying to define what the data fields are that are being collected, one of which came up in the group session was that there's education that's done on a one-on-one basis. So we had just done it as group workshops or as on the internet. but there was an agency that does it on a one-on-one basis. So we're going to go back to FHFA and try to get that put on the list. That's why we have these meetings. It's what you learn. The FHA initiatives to incentivize and require counseling. I actually referred to this a little bit earlier. We spent a fair amount of time with Sarah Jarek on this. She talked about that there'll be an announcement soon, which with parts are beginning to come out now already. There'll be an opportunity for comments so that we'll be able to provide input. This is the Hawk proposal, and she was really focused on 3 parts: providing incentives to get people to counseling before they do their mortgage application, that point in between mortgage application and closing, and then finally the post-purchase counseling and having incentives built in. And so there was a discussion sort of about the pragmatism of all this and how to make it work as effectively as possible. We also spent a little bit of time on the Coalition for HUD Housing Counseling Intermediaries has been promoting this idea of building housing counseling funding into the mortgage servicing process. And one of the big ideas that's coming out of these conversations is that there be money that the servicing strip, the monthly payment that gets included in your mortgage, that those are in a Fannie Freddie loan. It's 25 basis points. If some amount, say 3 basis points of that money might go instead for counseling and as a risk management program. There is interest in this. It's a pretty high-level conversation going on with FHFA, and many policymakers and lenders are at the table in the conversation, and obviously the leadership of the intermediaries. Lot Diaz and David Berenbaum kind of made a presentation around this at the meeting. It's an area that we'll want to follow closely and provide input whenever we can. There will be, we hope, this could be a very promising long-term solution for funding the industry over the long haul. So very exciting, but it's a longer-term effort. It will take a lot of work on many people's part. So
we have one question.
Yeah.
Any information on the post-mod counseling and how borrowers will be referred?
Oh yes. Well, so the way the system is working right now with the servicers, it started March 1st, and it looks like, as far as I can tell, all the servicers have contracted with HPF, and they are providing the post-modification counseling. We have gotten a couple servicers to say that they, in the second quarter of the program, so what's that, March, April, May, so June, July, August, that they're seriously thinking about doing some pilot efforts with counseling agencies to capture people who have already been counseled by that agency and come back to them. So the short of it is, have not been successful at getting this to be a broader initiative that gets these cases to the local agencies. We're continuing to push with servicers. There's a couple servicers that are at least interested in this conversation, and we've elevated this to kind of fairly high level to all the servicers that we have real access to. So, we're hoping that we'll at least get some business out of this, and it does actually reflect on a different topic, which we spent a lot of time on, where we kept coming up in the meeting in LA, and this is one that we're going to have to grapple with a lot, and that is this: our our agency's ability to do compliance when we're working with financial services in industry institutions. So in the Treasury post-modification counseling, the reporting requirements are actually pretty low, which I kept saying to the servicers, and which Treasury kept telling me. The servicers said, yes, but that doesn't mean that that's all you have to do when you work with Treasury. And with Treasury, it comes all these requirements, and in a variety of different things. It's not just Treasury, but in dealing with all the privacy issues, there's a very high level of security you need to provide, which has to do with whenever you're transferring data, digital data, or non-digital data for that matter, too. It all has its own set of world. And we have to figure out how a broader slice of the industry can manage that. And so HPF does this very well, which just gives them a major leg up. And no big secret here. And if other agencies want to be in that league, we need to figure out how to really up that capacity. And it's really a technology issue. So rather long answer there, but it does inform a lot more of the conversation we're having. Okay, let's see. So this leads logically into, there were a lot of other great discussions. It was a wonderful meeting. I had a great time. I think a lot of people had a great time. Shame we only do this once a year, but if you weren't able to make it, please come to the next one. We really enjoy the input and the interaction. So some action items that came out of this and things that we will help improve our work. So we just had this conversation about these issues around encryption and privacy and compliance. So there's going to be a technology work group, and if you're really good at these issues, you should consider joining us. Though it's already kind of a large group, but we have room for more. I think this is a huge topic. We're going to have to figure out how to get our arms around it in many ways. But we've been talking with members of the financial services industry and also trying to push out to investment banks and other places about trying to get funding for major technology upgrades for the industry. Frankly, the only place we're getting traction is with institutions that are already working with counselors. So, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley said, boy, these are interesting issues, we might be willing to sit on a panel, blah, blah, but this is not what our focus is. This is not where we're going to contribute. But for the for the Wells Fargos and Citibanks of the world, they were much more, they got it right away. They see it as a problem. They've been contributing towards it in some ways already. We will try to figure out a variety of different sources of where there might be funding opportunities. But the idea is that we try to address a variety of systemic issues that the industry has on the idea that if there was a one-time large investment, it really kicks the industry up into the next level. Helps make us paperless institutions. So Eileen Fitzgerald, in her talk around the future of counseling, spent a lot of time talking about, well, what the digital future will look like and what should we expect and how do we integrate it into our world, and talked about PII, which is personally identified information, and that commodity is has to be protected. Has to be protected in very specific ways. There has to be a lot of security levels built into all that. If we are going to kind of move into greater efficiencies, we have to figure out how to use the cloud and how to make ourselves more relevant to to take advantage of lots of technological innovation, and there's going to be increasingly large slice of our constituency of our client base who's going to think of, well, if they're not on the web, if they're not using these things, why I want to go to somebody that's more in tune to my thinking. And to some extent it's young people, but it's it's also a broader population too that is becoming wired. And if it's not on your computer, it's on your cell phone, and we all know the issues around there. So the idea is, let's try to get a working group together, and we've had some very good experience with the HUD Task Force and with the Communications Task Force. Let's put our heads together. I'll tell you one issue that I've got in really just trying to talk with institutions about what the need is that it's very hard to get your arms around how to define what the need is. And if we can get more, a better sense of that, that'll be helpful. Okay, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. We're going to get through the list. So that's one exciting development, Technology Work Group. Let me know if you want to be part of it. So Guide for Escalation Contacts. It's one of the more popular things that when we do anything on escalations and get a lead, I get lots of email from people about this. It was a very good discussion at the leaders meeting. So we're going to try to figure out escalation contacts at more and more of the servicers and figure out. And one thing we have to solve, though, is this should be an escalation contact that really only works for housing counselors. So if we put it on the website, that means it's open to the public, and then we could really lose the edge we've got there, because essentially it's meant to be a channel just for housing counselors. So we have to figure out how to protect that. Should it just be for members? Is there another way to do it? We're open to ideas, but we'll work on it this spring. Webinars, there were a lot of interest in the use of social media more effectively. We'll probably do a series on HUD compliance, and have had a couple of volunteers of very skilled people who do this day in and day out, who are interested in doing workshops so that it'll help people. Nonprofit advocacy, what can a 501c3 do and not do? So a bunch of good ideas there. We're open to some other ideas as well. We're also going to do, we need to think of what the best name is, but the peer-to-peer discussion calls. So this would be, there's a lot of talent of people on this call and in our network. Should we do a monthly call and have a particular topic? HUD compliance, risk management, creative funding, whatever those topics are. And then the idea is that instead of having a call with 80 or 100 people, that there might be 20 or 30 people on the call, and people can learn from each other and share ideas, and it'd be less driven by me and more of a conversation that happens. Matthew's talked about the state advocacy leaders, but really trying to herd the cats, and when we need a letter to Dianne Feinstein on, she told us that nothing, she sends a letter to the appropriations committee, nothing gets on that letter unless she's gotten constituents writing to her. Bang, this would be the team that will help us figure out what the letter should say and get it out quickly. We'll explore more discounts as well, and really need your help about what would be good there and what we should push in the future. And don't forget that you want the credit report discount if you need to act quickly. Very interesting conversation about the housing counseling job title, and at the end I think we had to say that a HUD certified housing advisor, some people were ready to use it, some people weren't. They weren't really at a consensus. There's a coalition on housing education excellence in New York that's doing kind of I think it's a focus group or a study on what they think the name should be, and we'll look to see what they come up with. But we've pursued this for a while, and we've got a number of irons in the fire. So we'll see if there's anything else that bubbles up, and are open to ideas, but did not seem to get the momentum that we had hoped for. The panel discussion was pretty high-flying and very interesting. A lot of ideas around technology and how we need to get ourselves up to speed in that world. Halafa Reed from Citibank had an interesting cut on the qualified mortgage rules, and that the 43% back-end ratio that the CFPB requires, well, there's an exemption for CDFI lenders, so community financial development institutions. Am I getting this right? Funny. But the CDFIs have an exemption, so potentially one market niche for them is any loan that's a really well-qualified person but happens to have a higher back-end ratio, but has shown that they can handle that. So that might be a niche for them, might create new opportunities. She was, talking a lot about how to build opportunities into the system. Eileen talked a lot about technology and how we need to figure out how to build that into our system, and that we need to sort of integrate technology in the sense that people will come to us. We may not be purely an internet-based or model, but we have to get much better at realizing that people will come to us through the internet, and how to integrate that, and then that they'll want to communicate with us that way, and that has to become more of our routine. Broad recognition, I think, of everybody that we need some better technology in communicating with HUD and with client tracking. I think they're doing a lot of work on CounselorMax in the NeighborWorks world. There are other ideas kicking around there, and we're open to all of them. But it was a good and kind of fun, interesting conversation. People talking about some big ideas. Clarify in Philadelphia has done a partnership with a healthcare management organization so that they basically can do healthcare and financial issues simultaneously, and it allows for a much deeper integration of two major sets of life issues for people, because they often go hand in hand. And she also talked about getting partners who have needs to fund some of the activity, so that I'm extrapolating here, but I think the example might be if you're providing financial information for people at a hospital, the hospital helps support the delivery of that work. But again, kind of thinking much bigger and outside of our traditional box of what our level of services are, and there's a lot of opportunity in all of that. Okay, well, so we're just about out of time, and let's just do a quick. Matthew, do you want to talk about the webinars that are coming up?
Yeah, the first is going to be, well, they're actually in, they're in the right order. The first will be this coming Monday, 3 to 4:30 Eastern. It's going to be from the folks at FireSpring, who we've done a few webinars with in the past, one on websites, one on online fundraising. But there's been a lot of demand for a webinar on social networking, so that's what this is going to be, and using it to your advantage, bringing clients in and that sort of thing. We've had really good responses on the past FireSpring webinars, so we're excited for that. I've circulated the link, and I'll include it to register, and I'll include it in the follow-up email. And then the other is basically round 2 of training for, and the first is more for folks on this call, the senior management executives. The second one, the training on the new CFPB mortgage servicing standards, is really just for everyone in your office, getting folks familiar with what's in the new standards, and it's really geared towards counselors, help you work more effectively with your clients. It's going to be presented by Kathy Mansfield from CFPB and Odette Williamson from the National Consumer Law Center, and it's going to be co-hosted by NCLR. We did this a few weeks back and had 700 or so people register and only could accommodate 500, so this is a follow-up to that to accommodate spillover, and hopefully we'll have just even some improvements. So even if you were on the first one and want to follow up, it may be worthwhile again.
So, and for all of you that are really interested in all these social networking and online kinds of issues, Jay Wilkinson turns out to be one of the top people in this field. He's a kind of very dynamic presenter and well worth going out of your way to catch these. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Here's a list of the new members of the National Housing Resource Center. Hopefully, you're getting your credit report applications in right now. You know, really appreciate all the support that everybody's been. We're going to have our next call next week is going to be, it won't be on a Thursday. We'll do it the day before on Wednesday at the same 1 o'clock time. Assuming that works for people, we just have a conflict on that Thursday. So, but we'll get the link and information out to you shortly. All right, everybody, keep up the good work. Good luck with the NOFA if you have to do it, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye.